the 75th anniversary of the United Nations falls in the middle of a global pandemic. Our founding mission is more critical than ever: to promote human dignity, protect human rights, respect international law, and save humanity from war. When the pandemic hit, I called for a global ceasefire. In our world today, we have one common enemy, COVID-19. Now is the time for a stepped-up push for peace to achieve a global ceasefire. The clock is ticking. And we must also make peace with our planet. The climate emergency threatens life itself. We must mobilize the whole world to reach carbon neutrality, net zero emissions of greenhouse gases by 2050. A growing number of cities, countries and companies have already pledged to meet this goal. Around the world, we must do more to end human suffering from poverty, inequality, hunger and hatred, and fight discrimination on the basis of race, religion, gender or any other distinction. The months of pandemic have seen a horrific rise in violence against women and girls. We must build on progress. A remarkable global collaboration is underway for a safe, affordable and accessible COVID-19 vaccine for all. The Sustainable Development Goals give us an inspiring blueprint for recovering better. We face colossal challenges. With global solidarity and cooperation, we can overcome them. That's what the United Nations is all about. On this anniversary, I ask people everywhere to join together. The United Nations not only stands with you, the United Nations belongs to you and is you with the peoples. Together, let us uphold the enduring values of the United Nations Charter. Let us build on our advances across the decades. Let us realize our shared vision of a better world for all.
Since the day India signed the UN Charter back in 1945, committing the not yet independent nation to a global normative framework designed to save succeeding generations from the scourges of war and to reaffirm faith in fundamental human rights. Since that day 75 years ago, India and the UN have partnered in the truest and deepest sense of the term. As early as 1946, India was speaking up for the disenfranchised at the United Nations, urging a nascent, emerging international order to embody the spirit of the UN Charter in word and in deed.
It raises issues which, if evaded at this juncture, will create a situation not only in Africa but throughout the world of the gravest consequence to peace.
India's multilateral vision was reiterated in its enthusiastic participation in the drafting of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, underlining the belief that everyone, everywhere, regardless of their political views or status, or their socioeconomic context, everyone has the same inalienable right to life, liberty, fairness, conscience, to democracy and well-being. Pursuing its belief in Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, seeing the world as one family, India drew the attention of the UN General Assembly to racial discrimination in South Africa, and it raised its voice against colonialism not only in India, but around the world. Over the years, India's commitment to multilateralism is not wavered, spanning a broad spectrum of support, including UN peacekeeping, climate change, human rights, and sustainable development. India currently sits on the Human Rights Council, on the executive boards of multiple UN agencies, not to mention on many UN commissions. India assumed the chair of the WHO Executive Board this year during the most challenging moment in the history for WHO, and has stressed the importance of shared responsibility in that role. In April this year, India co-sponsored a UN General Assembly resolution for fair, equitable, and timely access to essential equipment and medication and any future COVID-19 vaccines to all nations. As the pharmacy of the world, India plays a critical role in the rollout of the COVID vaccine, both in India and around the world. This coming January 2021, India will begin a 2-year term at the UN Security Council. I'm listing all these ways and means through which India contributes to the work of the UN and the global human family because they demonstrate the long-standing, unwavering commitment of this country to the values and principles of the United Nations. At a moment in history when narrow self-interest has eclipsed the bigger public good in some parts of the world, India stands out as an inspiring example of what is needed to find collective solutions to common global problems. Many of the great landmark achievements of the UN-India partnership have been commemorated through the issuance of postage stamps. Since 1949, over 40 UN-themed stamps were issued by India Post. They are historical documents, they are communication tools, and they are works of art in their own right. Artistically, the stamps are remarkable in how they translate the universal but sometimes abstract language of the UN into an accessible, visible language. A fantastic example of this is the stamp issued by India Post on the 15th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It pictures Eleanor Roosevelt with a charkha spinning wheel, the Gandhian symbol of the Indian struggle for independence. This merger of the local with the global aspiration is particularly poignant. These India Post stamps were issued in the tens of millions, and they were seen and handled by many more hundreds of millions. They conveyed their messages to the literate and the illiterate alike all over the world. Taken together, the message from India Post seems crystal clear. India is and remains steadfast in its commitment to multilateralism, sustainable development, and the values of the United Nations. In this 75th anniversary of the United Nations, I can think of few more appropriate ways to commemorate the partnership between the UN and India than through this exhibit of stamps. Before the digital age, they were the principal medium by which ideas traveled and the first symbols of an emerging global community of nations and peoples. I'd like to say a very special thank you to the Government of India this year for their extraordinary partnership and support, and for issuing a commemorative stamp on the United Nations' 75th birthday. May these small messengers of universal values inspire and delight you all, and may they deepen our collective appreciation for the enduring partnership between India and the United Nations. Thank you.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to join this virtual gathering to commemorate the 75th United Nations Day, an occasion for governments and peoples to reminisce and reaffirm their faith in the purposes and principles of the UN Charter, while also to refocus, reform and revitalize their efforts to meet those purposes. 75 years ago, we, the people of India, were fortunate to have been a founding signatory of the UN Charter, whereby men and women of 50 nations rising from the horrors of war came together as the peoples of the United Nations. 75 years ago on this day, the Charter came into force. A new rules-based world order was established. The United Nations came into being with an unrivaled reach and an unequivocal legitimacy. And with that, India's vision of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, which sees all creation as one family, also took a global manifestation. Holding true to that vision, India has been actively contributing to the work of the United Nations to the best of its capabilities, both in moral and material aspects. Be it Ms. Hansa Mehta's seminal contribution to recognize in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that instead of all human beings, rather than all men are created equal, or be it the 200,000 personnel India has provided to the UN peacekeeping missions since 1948, India's abiding commitment to and untiring efforts for the welfare of the world as a whole remains unshaken. Friends, the world started feeling as one whole when words and thoughts began traveling around the globe with the free flow of international mail, enabled by a system riding on postal stamps. Collecting postal stamps exchanged was akin to narrating the story of any relationship. UN India has thus very suitably documented the fascinating story of India and the United Nations through philately. I take this opportunity to also inaugurate the virtual exhibition of UN-themed stamps that India Post has brought out and the India-themed ones brought out by the UN Postal Administration. I am sure that we are all looking forward to walk through the milestones of the India-UN journey via this virtual exhibit. Excellencies, as India rises, it promises to lift all boats in its rising tide. An instance of this would be the India-UN Development Partnership Fund. In the spirit of South-South cooperation, India, in collaboration with the UN, has been supporting fellow developing countries in their national development priorities across all sustainable development goals. This principle is in fact the essence of India's motto of domestic development, Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas, Sabka Vishwas. The Honorable Prime Minister of India, Shri Narendra Modi, in his address at the ECOSOC commemoration of UN's 75th anniversary highlighted that be it access to nutrition, health, education, electricity or housing, we are making great progress through our inclusive programs. Today, our Ayushman Bharat scheme is the world's largest health protection program, covering 500 million individuals. While the best of health systems have been severely tested by the COVID-19 pandemic, India has remained resilient by making the fight against the pandemic a people's movement. By combining the efforts of the government and the society, India based its COVID-19 strategy on the mantra Jaan Bhi Jahan Bhi, that is focusing on life and livelihoods. For the latter, we have put forward a vision of Atmanirbhar Bharat, a self-reliant and resilient India integrated with the global economy. Even during these very difficult times of a raging pandemic, we are not oblivious to our responsibility towards our fellow global citizens. Our Prime Minister's assurance to the global community that India's vaccine production and delivery capacity will be used to help all humanity in fighting this crisis reaffirms India's commitment to being inclusive and non-transactional in collaborating with other stakeholders in a collective quest to develop solutions. Excellencies, we are also mindful of our responsibility towards our future generations. Over the past few years, we have reduced 38 million tons of carbon emissions annually. We have set a target to install 450 gigawatt of renewable energy and restore 26 million hectares of degraded land by 2030. Internationally, our initiatives to set up the International Solar Alliance and the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure are practical manifestations of climate action. It goes without saying that global challenges call for globally coordinated responses. Unfortunately, however, the raging pandemic has laid bare the shortcomings of our multilateral institutions. The world has come to realize that we cannot fight today's challenges with outdated structures. Without comprehensive reforms, the UN faces a crisis of confidence. For today's interconnected world, we need reformed multilateralism that reflects today's realities, gives voice to all stakeholders, addresses contemporary challenges and focus on human welfare. The declaration adopted in UNGA to commemorate the 75th anniversary of the UN acknowledges the need for reforms of the United Nations. It also underlines that work still needs to be done in ensuring development, in addressing climate change, in reducing inequalities, and in leveraging digital technologies. As India prepares for its term at the UN Security Council as an elected member from 2021-22, we look forward to working with all other nations towards this continuous pursuit, in line with our Honorable Prime Minister's 5S approach of Samman, that is respect, Samvad, that is dialogue, Sahyog, that is cooperation, Shanti, that is peace, and Samriddhi, that is prosperity. Let us therefore celebrate the 75th UN Day for the realization of the urgency to reform and for the determination to take collective action. Thank you for the attention.
If you recall, in 2007, the UN General Assembly had passed a resolution declaring 2nd October, the birth anniversary of the Mahatma, as International Day of Non-Violence. So this was 2007. Also, 50 years earlier, Martin Luther King Jr. had visited India. So 2009 was the 140th birth anniversary of the Mahatma, and it was also the 50th year celebration of Martin Luther King Jr.'s visit to India. And the UN very aptly, I think, very appropriate for the event, 2 years after the declaration of the International Day of Non-Violence, decided to bring out a stamp. Release of that UN stamp also, in a sense, captured the wide resonance that the Mahatma's message had for the work of the UN. SDG's basic philosophy, to the farthest first, actually captures the Mahatma's essential core. And the artist himself, I don't know if you are aware of this, he was Muhammad Ali's physician. But with deep knowledge of medical science and dealing with the human condition, he painted the picture of the Mahatma in very striking colors. So his elevation to sainthood in terms of being revered as a Mahatma, I think is well deserved, and it also has set the coordinates for India's interaction with the rest of the world.
India's association with the UN is unique in many ways. It is a country which was there at the time of signing of the UN Charter, although we were not independent. And since then, India has been participating in a diverse array of UN activities. So the stamps that have come out through the UN Postal Administration is only a reflection of the very many ways in which India and the UN cooperate towards global good. The culture of peace that the UN wants to promote requires also a better civilizational understanding. And that was the theme of Dr. M.S. Subbulakshmi's famous bhajan, which was actually an ode to global friendship. And this was in 2016. That year was important for us for two reasons. One, it was the 50th anniversary of Bharat Ratna M.S. Subbulakshmi's concert at the UN on the UN Day. Also, 2016 was the centenary anniversary of M.S. Subbulakshmi. So we thought that could we work on something which is a fitting tribute to this intersection between a great artist and the UN.
Gender equality is a psycho-social project as much as it is a political project, an economic project, and a social project. So in order to change the mindsets of people, you had to have certain partners who must stand up for gender equality, who must advocate it, and who must drive a people's movement around it. And that is the genesis of the HeForShe movement, because men and boys are at the heart of the transformation for gender equality and women's empowerment after, of course, women and girls themselves. Our HeForShe unit had been looking at philatelic partnerships because, stamps are a very special way of commemorating people and the great projects and ideas for humanity, in my view. So then we got together the concept. We contacted UPA, the United Nations Postal Union, UPU, and India Post was very willing and supportive, and we got together. So, it came together. The universe came together to produce this, wonderful stamp. The design, we had 2-3 designs in mind, and among the 3 partners, we finally came to the design which we now have. And for me, the idea was to reflect the Ardhanarishwar Roop. Because a man standing up for a woman's rights is really symbolized in the Ardhanarishwar Roop.
So it's 27th September 2014 when our Prime Minister requested the General Assembly to have 21st June every year declared as the International Day of Yoga. That meant that the implementation of this proposal was to be done by the Permanent Mission of India in New York. Since there was no background, we didn't have to go to any of the committees of the General Assembly, but we could go directly into the General Assembly plenary. And that helped us to compress the time frame a lot. The second thing that happened was that we had to choose an existing item on the General Assembly's agenda approved that year. Otherwise, this would have to be inscribed for the next year. So when we looked at the approved agenda of the General Assembly that year, we found that the Prime Minister's proposal would fit very nicely with discussions on global health. The third decision that we had to take was how to get a majority of the members of the General Assembly to agree to this proposal. In the 193 member General Assembly, a majority meant 97 countries had to agree to adopt it. So these were the three big considerations that were in our mind. When we look back, all these three issues that we identified ourselves actually played a very important role in having the proposal discussed and adopted in a record of 75 days. That meant that all 193 countries agreed because it's a unanimous resolution. And out of the 193, 177 member states of the General Assembly became co-sponsors. So the Yoga Day initiative is actually a good example of how to implement the idea in the UN Charter of We the Peoples, because it is a combined multiple stakeholder activity. But it was also a very proud day for those of us who worked in the multilateral system, because it showed that the system was responsive to ideas which were inclusive, which were forward-looking, and which were meant to improve the relationship between man and nature.